want to talk about session 10, about how a real man betters God's world. And as a real man betters God's world, it all intersects with the things that we've talked about as we've been defining this definition of manhood. Think about a man who courageously follows God's word, a man who loves and protects God's woman, a man who excels at God's work, and now here, a man who betters God's world. We've talked in the past about how we have our own story and we kind of have to unpack from that story. And we pull out of that and we have a whole background that we come to. And we come to that and we come to parenting with a whole suitcase full of stuff. We got to know what's in there. And we can't not be who we are in the various moments God calls us to as men who are husbands, but as men who are fathers. And we get to lay down this legacy moving forward as men. And we need to think about that, and we need to think about it in light of our story. So as we begin to share a little bit with you, when I think back to my childhood, if somebody were to ask me what's the happiest memory from being a kid that I can recall, I go back to this one moment in Little League Baseball, in this little town of 1,000 people in upstate New York. We played 6 innings, and it was the 6th inning. And we were down to the next town over, Edmiston. And if Satan fell from heaven, I was convinced as a child that he landed in Edmiston, New York. Like Edmiston, they were the rivals. They were the people, like that was the bad side of the tracks. I had family that lived in Edmiston, right? But even I'd go over to Edmiston, it felt like I was in enemy territory. Because in New Berlin, you didn't like people from Edmiston all that much, and they didn't like you. Well, it was a Little League All-Star game, and my dad was the coach. He was the coach of our team, and we had a really, really good All-Star team. We had this guy that was a pitcher who could throw about 67 to pushing 70 miles an hour as a little leaguer. He was a big farm boy. His name was Rich, and I hated facing him in Little League. Scared to death, this little guy up there, waiting and waiting and waiting. And he was a monster. But this one game, Edmiston was beating us. We got to the 6th inning, we were down by 7 runs. But there was good news, because our bats started to light up, man. And we started to hit, and we started to hit, and we started to hit. I batted 5th on the All-Star team, I still remember. A kid named Brad batted 3rd. He had good power, and a kid named this big guy, Rich, batted 4th. He was cleanup, and I batted after him. Rich gets up. He hits one off it looks like it's going to be a home run, but it hits the wall, and he ends up doubling, and he sends in Brad the tying run. And up comes Mighty Mouse here, Brian F. Hurlbut, Esquire. And I'm waiting on this Edmiston pitcher. And I can still remember the guy. He had this big, high, overhand delivery. You could see it coming from a mile away. So I'm waiting on the pitch, and I make contact with that thing, send it over the first baseman's glove. Just a little kind of choppy single. I ran to first, Rich ran home, and we won the game. And my dad came out, and he threw me up in the air. I still remember it. We went down for ice cream as a team, and I thought, I am the king of New Berlin, New York. This is it. They're going to parade in my honor, purple robe. I mean, people are going to know this man walking down the street, right? I remember that. That was one of the greatest moments of my childhood. When you're a parent, you have those kinds of things that are highs. You have those moments where you think and you parent for moments like that. My dad parented for a moment like that. As a kid, I lived for a moment like that. That kind of familial connection in the story, right? I've shared with you enough about my story with my dad that you know that it was definitely not a complete zenith experience. Through most of my childhood, it was idyllic. And then, as an adult, things started to change, and my dad's addiction happened, and all these pieces started to unravel. Well, here's the thing. As we talk about how a man betters God's world, You can't just parent out of a story of victory, because as a parent, you are living everything that you have in your story. All that you have, you bring to the table. And as your family takes on water, you're the one who has to guide them. You're the captain of the vessel. And as life happens, you have to shepherd them, care for them, guide them, direct them through those things. It's why parenting is not paint by numbers. We're going to talk about some really good principles for parenting, but please don't mistake these principles for silver bullets as dads. Understand that they're not, and understand that the most important thing you can do is help your child navigate the highs and the lows and what real life brings. So I start with that story because for me as a kid, that was kind of like the dad-son zenith. My dad, my coach, throws me up in the air. I'm the king of New Berlin for a day. We get the ice cream. Everybody's buying it for Brian F. Hurlbut that day. And it was awesome. It was great. Let me give you another story that comes as a parent. I'm in my office in 2015, and I get a call from my wife. And my wife says, Brian, can you do something? Can you go and check on my sister? My sister-in-law, my wife's the oldest of 6, my sister-in-law had moved out to be here in Utah with us, and she was a nurse. And she was at a local hospital not far from our church. She had moved into a new apartment. She was in the basement, had a room in the house of a wonderful single lady. And she had just moved in there. We had a few people in the church that helped her move in. I hadn't even been to the apartment. But my wife had gotten contacted by her work that she didn't show up for work. And she said, can you go check on her? My parents have called, and they're kind of concerned. Now, my wife asked me to check on her for an important reason. She was parenting. She was down in southern Utah at the Shakespeare Festival with my daughter, my oldest daughter was very talented, acting, singing. She was down there doing an Ophelia Shakespeare monologue and just very gifted. She was down there with her, and she would go down every year and spend time with her while she performed and competed in the competition. So she said, could you go and check on her? It's not like her to not show up. She was a very good nurse and very conscientious. So I said, sure. So I head over to just the town south of us here, South Jordan. And I get in the car, I drive over. I ended up calling the people who helped her move in if they could just come over in case I had any issues, because I'd never been to the place before. So I drive up, I'm knocking on a door. Nobody's coming. Nobody's coming. At this point, my wife is texting me a little anxious. And now I have my father-in-law, who works in the operating room at the largest non-urban hospital east of the Mississippi, and he's texting me. He's an anesthetist. Is everything okay? We're concerned about her. I don't know. I'm trying to get in the house. I haven't gotten in yet. Well, we went around the back and found a window that had not been locked. So we slid open the window, hopped down in, went down, found her bedroom door. Stephanie! Stephanie! No answer. So I open the door, and there she is laying on the bed. I go over and I feel her, and she's cold to the touch. Not completely, but cool to the touch. Immediately, I tell one of the people with us to call 911. They call 911. I pull her off the bed, begin to get coached with 911 on the phone, pumping her chest frantically. All the while, my phone's buzzing. I'm in text, questions. And I'm pumping. She's gone. I had to call my wife. I had to call my father-in-law in the operating room. They had to wheel him out in a wheelchair. My wife, bless her heart, incapacitated, in a Starbucks in Cedar City, Utah. I ended up having to drive 3 hours down to get her. She had to make up a story to my oldest daughter because we didn't want her to find out that way. So she said that she wasn't feeling well and she needed to come home. So I drove down, I got her and brought her home. And we prepared to tell our children. One was 7, one was 12, one was 15, almost going to turn 16. It was October 2nd, 2015. I have delivered some of the worst news you can imagine as a pastor. I have had to go tell children that their father is dead. The kind of news you have to deliver sometimes, it's so painful. To this day, in my whole life, I have never seen pain like I saw on my oldest daughter that night. Never. Now, when I became a parent, I didn't sign up for that. At least I thought. I didn't plan on that. I didn't take a course in how to work with your children through the shrapnel of all that meant for their lives moving forward. As in their categories, they try to understand what the intersection of the goodness of God and the sovereign care of God and life and meaningful relationships and people that they love. Outside of our family, in that house, that nuclear family, she was the closest human that they had in their life. So, see, here's the thing. You're going to have moments where you throw the kid up in the air and they're the king or the queen for the day. And then you're going to have moments where you got to bring hell to their doorstep. And you got to figure out how to talk with them and process with them and everything in between. It's why we have to be prepared to better God's world, because not everything that happens in God's world is awesome. Not everything that's happening in our story is awesome. And I can't uncouple myself from all that my father did to parent my children. I have to parent my children while bearing the baggage of all that's happened in that. And then, that happens. Well, we got some work to do, man. Men, we got some work to do. Because Proverbs says, who knows what a day may bring forth. And you have no idea what you're going to have to parent your children through tomorrow. I know somebody in this room. I know you've parented your children through some very difficult times. I know that you will parent your children through even more difficult times ahead. We need to be prepared. Whether we're grandparents happening to adult children, whether we're adults happening to children, whether we're adults happening to teens, all of these pieces, we've got to be prepared. So let's talk about it together. A man and his children. God's first recorded command to the man in the Bible is what? I love this. Be a dad. You say, what? Yeah. Genesis 1:28. And God blessed them, and God said to them, here's his command, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. And have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Happen to this world in fruitfulness. Be prepared to be a dad. Children are given by God to enrich a man's life. And that happens in a lot of ways. That happens in unexpected ways. Sometimes I've had my children speak wisdom to me, and I'm like, where did you get that? That's amazing. I've had them do just hilarious stuff that takes the edge off of the worst moments imaginable. Right? I've had them remind me of the simplicity of life at times when I come loaded and it's all complex, and they, in their, especially when they're little, in their simplicity, all they just want is presence in that moment. And it's beautiful, and it reminds me of what really matters and recalibrates me. The Bible says in Psalm 127:3, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb a reward. There's a quote in your notes by Teddy Roosevelt. For unflagging interest and enjoyment, a household of children certainly makes all other forms of success and achievement lose their importance by comparison. I love that. Nothing quite like a house full of kids to really enliven you and quicken you. Third, children give a dad a way to make some of his most significant and enduring contributions to bettering this world. As Neil Postman said, children are the living messages we send to a time we will not see. I won't be able to impact people that my children will. They'll be able, because they have grown up in a different time than I did, they will be able to navigate, and already I can see it. They can navigate certain things better than I can. And I'm not just talking about a smartphone. They can navigate other things. They can navigate certain nuances of relationships. They can navigate in a world, right now in a world with gender confusion. A godly child who grows up in this will have been baked in that reality, and if they're godly, they're going to be able to navigate it by their nature in ways that you and I just look at in frustration sometimes. And they're going to learn how to trim the sail. They're going to learn how to navigate in that world. It's a beautiful thing, and to make contributions we simply won't be able to. They're like seeds that are planted in the ground, that you may just begin to see the little saplings come up. The challenge every dad faces is how to raise up and launch well-adjusted, difference-making children into the next generation. This requires what? Being a smart dad. We talked about that. You got to be a smart dad. We brought that up in session 4. So what we're going to spend most of our time here is kind of working through what children would say they need most from you as a dad. And this is kind of a fun way to think about it. What might they say that they need most from you? First, kids would say this: Dad, I need you and Mom to be there for me in my early years. Be there, meaning to be present, to be active. As your notes point out, studies have shown that a strong, nurturing environment in the opening years of a child's life, along with lots of face-to-face interaction with mom and dad, is essential to a healthy brain and personality development. Don't make your wife change every diaper. All right? Don't. You lay hold of engagement with your children. I remember my oldest daughter crawling all around me while I was in grad school, laying down on the floor, highlighting books, and man, she wanted to highlight books, but she didn't know what she was highlighting, right? Wanted to go after because she sees Dad doing it, right? Engage, engage, engage. If you've got young children, Dad, become the one that puts them to bed. Do that. Put them to bed. Let that be your time with your kids. I found in my life as a parent, the sweetest time with my kids when they were little, putting them to bed. And I was so glad that really my wife wanted me to do that, and that I did that in hindsight. That you'd lay hold of that. And I had the whole schedule down, right? I mean, I'm singing through, I had a whole hymnal in my head. I'd sing over them, right? And I could tell it was a rough night. If we got past in the garden and we got past the old rugged cross and we got into day by day, we were having a rough night. But I got to put them to bed. I got to talk to them. I got to engage them at that time. I'm busy. I was working a lot, but that was my time. Bedtime's a great time for a dad. Paul Meyer, psychologist, makes this statement. One of the things I've learned in my psychiatric training is that approximately 85% of a person's ultimate personality is formed by the time he or she is 6 years old. Those first 6 years are obviously the most crucial. The most crucial. The reality is your presence matters, and that goes both ways, right? That means that when you are harsh with a small child, you send a fear that it's difficult to get back. They'll remember those kinds of things. I can remember as a child, not so much with my dad, because my dad was very gentle with me as a child. But I can distinctly remember going over to guys' houses when I was a little kid, other buddies. And I can remember being scared to death of some of their fathers because I heard their voice, I saw the way they act, and I sensed the temperature of the room when they came home from work. It was a different deal, man. I mean, they walked in and they were surly. They were on edge. They wanted everybody to step into place. And it became this cold kind of moment where everything twisted and changed. You can do that as a dad, unfortunately. Hugh Mizzeldine, child psychologist, says no one outgrows his feelings of childhood, for better or for worse. The child lives on in the adult. I've seen some of those same guys, by the way, as an adult. Now they're kind of old guys. If we got into the octagon together, they're going down. But it's weird when I see them. I still think about the same things. I still think of them as those guys that had that edge, that crust to them. I can't uncouple my mind from that. It's embedded in me. What else might a child say? Dad, I need your discipline and instruction balanced with love. Right? In general, you and I are called to speak the truth in love. Right? Speak the truth, but to do it in love. Puritan saying, I've said it a lot at our church. It's one of my favorite sayings ever outside the Bible. God loveth adverbs. That's what the Puritans used to say. He loves how you do things, how you say things. So much is told in that. He spoke to me kindly, adverb. He spoke to me harshly, and everything is in the adverb, not the verb. So guard your adverbs, men. We're not very good at this. We have a hard time with it. We just want to speak it. And we need to be careful here. Speak the truth and love. Truth without love brings harm. Love without truth enables self-destruction. Proverbs 29:15 through 17. The rod and reproof give wisdom. You're not helping your child by not disciplining them. But a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. When the wicked increase, transgression increases, but the righteous will look upon their downfall. Discipline your son, and he'll give you rest. He will give delight to your heart. My girls, they knew and have known in our home. 2 of them are out of the home now. 1 is still in it. And they all would tell you they knew that it was go time when I said one thing. It was just one thing, and it was go time. When all of a sudden, their mother became referred to as my wife. And the moment I said, please don't talk to my wife that way, he just went, my wife on us. You could see the whites of their eyes. They began to realize, okay, wait a minute. I went too far with mom because she ceased to be mom. She just became his wife. So in a healthy way, they need to sense your shadow. If you have small children, let me encourage you with something. You discipline them in love, but you discipline them, and you hold the line. You don't help the world, and you don't help them by not holding the line. A story that is legendary in our home. I mean, it is legendary in our house. My middle daughter is the least picky eater that's ever walked through the Hurlbut house, me included. And there's a reason for that. She was 8 years old, maybe 7. And she got in this habit. Maybe if you got small kids, you've had kids in this habit, where she would get her cereal, and she would start it, and then she'd get yakking and talking and looking around, and then it would get soggy, and she'd go, I don't want to eat it. It's soggy. Well, this became like not a one-off event. Like we're going through cereal like mad, okay? So we are going through cereal. I'm like, listen, I said to my wife, we can't keep throwing out every bowl of cereal every morning because this kid gets yakking, talking, looking around, and it gets soggy. It gets soggy. It gets soggy. I got tired of hearing it getting soggy. So 9 a.m., on a Monday. It was my day off. She's sitting at the bar in our home, and she's got her cereal. And here we go. I don't want to finish it. It's soggy. Regan, finish your cereal. I don't want to. It's soggy. Regan, you've let it get soggy. You need to finish your cereal. Regan, here it is. You're not getting up until you finish your cereal. Drew the line. Okay, now, battle lines are drawn. There she is. I'm ready. Okay. So, this girl, 9:30. She hadn't, half hour. No, she hadn't eaten it. 10. She hadn't eaten it. 10:30. We're an hour and a half in. My wife, she's starting to cry. Not my wife, but my daughter. My wife looks at me and says, Brian, I can't do this. She leaves. I said, sweetheart, if I don't win this, I mean, this is the female Saddam Hussein coming along if I don't win this, okay? I got to win it. I got to win it. 11:30. We keep going. Noon. We're rolling. We started at 9. She took her last bite of cereal in celebration, looked at me and said, Daddy, I finished all my cereal. 6:30 p.m. 6:30 p.m. I waited that girl out for 9.5 hours. I got so far in, I realized I can't lose on this one. I can't lose. Right? Sometimes you got to walk it out. Now, I did it patiently, but I did it with resolve. You got to have resolve. You got a chart in your workbook. I want you to take a second and glance at that. It's on page 62. And when you look at this chart, up on the upper end, you've got high love and low love. You've got low discipline all the way over to the left and high discipline all the way over to the right. And I want to just map out for you how as parents and as dads we kind of come on this, where sometimes we can attempt to be loving, but we can be low in discipline. We can attempt to be loving, be high in discipline. We can attempt to, maybe be high in discipline, but our love is not really, our adverbs are not awesome. And they aren't feeling the love. And then, unfortunately, there are some situations where, and some dads, that they're low on both. And we need to understand a little bit about this and kind of assess ourselves a little bit as we think about this. So as we think about it, if you're high in love, but you're low in discipline, really what's going to happen is you're going to be an enabler. I'm not even sure at that point we can really call it love. I think it ends up being kind of a twisted way of being destructive. It's a way where we put our hands on the backs of our children because we care so much for what they want in life that we actually push them over a cliff. And that kind of a permissiveness ends up not being very helpful. I love this quote from Grant Gallagher in his book, Think Like a Horse. He says, if you compromise your boundaries for the sake of the relationship, sooner or later, you'll lose the relationship. Think about that. If you compromise your boundaries for the sake of the relationship, sooner or later, you will lose the relationship. You're not winning by being permissive. You're not winning by always being so warm that you have no lines that you draw. How you draw those lines, very important. Good adverbs, in control. But that you draw the lines, that's very important. High discipline, high love. If you have high discipline, high love, then you are authoritative. And I want to say to you, I think that's a good thing. As a man, you are an authority in your home. You have to have the freedom and feel the right to properly, listen carefully, not abusively, Not in a way that marginalizes, but in a way that uplifts others, that makes others feel safe, that makes others feel wanted, that makes others feel secure. You own that space. You don't apologize for being a man, and you don't apologize for being a dad. So being authoritative is actually a good thing. It's the kind of thing where you have high love and you have high discipline. You're wanting order. You're wanting those kids to know, wait a minute, oh, now she's my wife. It's flipped a little bit here, guys. You misunderstand how you're talking now, and we need to bring some discipline in a healthy way to bear. Low discipline, low love, that's neglectful. That's a child that doesn't have attention. And that's a child, by the way, that'll act out to get attention. They will act out to get it. You know when you're engaging a child that's being neglected. You can see it. Because they will do any and everything to get your attention at any cost. Because they're not getting any. And it's not positive, the little bit that they get. High discipline and low love is authoritarian. That's different than authoritative. Authoritarian is, do what I told you to do. End of story. That's not helpful. One of the things you're going to do is walk, and we'll talk about this, you'll walk through with your child in different seasons in their life. And that mandates a different kind of posture. You have to attend to the moment. You have to understand the room. You have to read the landscape. You've got to know the contours of what it means. And you simply cannot just want what you want for the sake of order. Instead, you have to want it for the right reasons, which is always the honor and glory of God. As noted in your notes, children raised in authoritative homes were more likely to adopt the values of the family, respond to authority figures, and they possess a high sense of personal well-being. Number 3, they might tell you this, Dad, I need you to know my personality and to honor it. You know some dads who live vicariously through their kids, right? They're like Uncle Rico on Napoleon Dynamite. The coach never put him in. But man, if they got in 82, they would have won state. But now their kid, boy, they want him to get in. And he's going to be an athlete come hell or high water. He's going to do the things I couldn't do or didn't do. I want better for my child, which sometimes is good, but sometimes is a way that dad smuggles in his own agenda through his child to live vicariously through his child. No, what your job is and my job is to look at our kids and to understand who they are, right? Your kids will have similarities coming from the same home. But you right now can think of, if you have multiple kids, you can think about it, but you got to think about it. You got to recognize, right? I got 3 dudettes, and those girls, they have some similar traits. They come DNA by it, honestly. But they are nuanced. They are unique. They have things about them, right? Ways that I have to speak to them individually. There's no one size fits all. In your notes, there's a reference to a resource, a book that you can get, Personality Plus for Parents by Florence Littauer. I'd encourage you, find that resource, find another resource. But assess the personality of your child so that you don't foist something on them where they become a mirror image of all that you wanted. 4th, Dad, I need you to discover my bent and actively support it. This is a little different than your personality. I need you to know what gets me up in the morning, the things that I'm passionate about. So our oldest daughter is a good example of this for us. When I mentioned the tragic story of my sister-in-law's passing, well, where was my wife? She's down at the Shakespeare Festival. I hate to tell you this, but I really cannot stand musicals. I mean, I just can't. When my wife and I got married, it's one of the reasons why I don't think just mapping on personality profiles is necessarily the best way to find your mate. Partly because that doesn't really tell you the substance of life. right? If your marriage is going to be a success because you both love hiking, it's going to be a pretty shallow marriage. There's got to be deeper rhythms than you like hiking or you like the same movies, okay? Well, my wife and I don't like very many of the same things at all. She does not like sports. I love sports. If I never had to endure the pain of a musical one moment in my life, I would be gleefully happy. But my wife, oh, she loves them. She loves them. And that means that my daughters love them. And that means that my daughters run around the house and they sing them. And that means that in the shower, the shower, when one of my daughters, for all three of them, get in the shower, there's no peace in my home. There's not. They're singing at the top. It's all throughout the house. And you can't do anything to quiet it down because they can't hear you yelling. You just got to go with it, right? This is what it is in a house filled with estrogen. Well, my daughter, really gifted and had an amazing voice, really amazing voice. And she'd do school musicals, and I would go. And let me tell you something. I can love a musical with my daughter. You better believe I can. I can sit all day with a musical with my daughter. Now, I'm not watching The King and I at home, all right? But I can sit all day watching a musical with that girl out there. And we would do everything we could to make that happen for her. She ended up being in a movie. It's not even, like, my least favorite kind of movies, besides musicals, are horror movies. She was in a horror movie. We went on set. We go on set. We're with the director. We're touring the place that they're filming. I mean, what are we doing here for her? Because we're after her bent. We're orchestrating things around her. We want to revel in what gets her up in the morning. You got to know their abilities. You got to know their passions. There's a resource there, Ames Testing, that you can look at as a great resource as well. And that was referenced earlier when we talked about work. Number 5, Dad, I need you to know too much is too much. Boy, well-meaning dads, right? We go in, I mean, after all, we're Betterman. And the guy up teaching Betterman told us to own the space. So we go in and we own the space. Listen carefully. Too much control over your child's life crushes the spirit and incites rebellion. You can squelch them. They don't have opportunity to express themselves, their thoughts, their opinions. If every time they express an opinion that's contrary to yours and you immediately, no, shut it down. They will never feel the space. It doesn't mean that you never bring correction. It doesn't mean you never explain. It doesn't mean that their perspectives aren't naive. It doesn't mean they're not well thought out. But it means that you let them sit on the table for a little spell. You give them a little voice here so that they can be heard and valued and treasured. If they're not safe, listen, the world's harsh. If they're not safe to speak at your table, how are they going to feel safe to speak at any table? Ever. Too much money in your child's life will spoil them and steal their will to succeed. Some fathers can be absent with their body, and so they turn on the provision with money. And here's what happens. It's provision from the void. It's provision from the void. They need your presence more than they need your bank account. Now, do they want your bank account? I raised 3 daughters. I'm telling you right now, they want every bit of my bank account, every number, okay? They would love it. My youngest daughter has got some high-priced styles, man. High-priced styles. Too much. So what do? Well, she works. She's 14 and a half, and she works. She loves to work, which I'm glad for. She's got a good work ethic. She gets after it. She makes her own money. So we put her on the plan. We have a 50-40-10 plan. That's our deal, right? You save 50% of what you make. That's untouchable. That just goes. That's not for one day when you want the $180 sweater. No. We burn the $180 sweater, okay? But that's untouchable. 40%, you can do what you want with, and 10% you give to the Lord. So she learns from an early age, right? 50, 40, 10, 50, 40, 10. Too high expectations for your child wounds and embitters them. You can't always live in disappointment. If they get their grades and 4 of their 6 grades are great and 2 could use improvement, and all you talk about are the 2 that can use improvement, what are you going to do to them? You're just going to break them down over time. You're just going to break them down. Fathers, don't provoke your children lest they become discouraged. And sometimes, unfortunately, there's a lot of discouraged little ones out there. 6th, Dad, I need you to show me what to believe by living it. Remember the commercial in the 80s? It was 1987. Remember the old public service announcement if you grew up in the 80s, the drug commercial with the kid? And he had the guy that had the great 80s hair, he had like the Caucasian afro, and he came in, and he finds the drug paraphernalia, right? And he shakes it in front of them. What is this? And the kid's kind of squirming and trying to get out of the conversation, and he keeps pressing into him, and then finally, remember? The kid says, I learned it by watching you, right? There was like a series of commercials, though, that kind of had this theme about parenting. You remember a few years later, the early 90s, there was Nike had the commercial with Charles Barkley where he was telling people, and they thought Charles Barkley was a horrible person because he was saying, I'm not a role model. I'm not a role model. I'm not a role model. Remember what the commercial said? Your parents are your role model. Your parents are your role model. Hey, Chuck ain't right all the time, but he was right about that. If I don't need Charles Barkley to parent, heaven's sakes, my children. What I need is me to do it. Remember, I shared with you a quote in an earlier session from Grant Gallagher, the author of Think Like a Horse. And he said that you live what you learn. You live what you learn. They've got to see it. My wife was driving several years ago, and there was an incident, as happens in our state, because our state has horrible drivers. And there was this incident where this woman that was driving didn't see her, kind of cut her off, so my wife beeps the horn. Well, the woman turns around and just, mad as all get out, flips off my wife, gives her the bird right there. My wife was kind of surprised, and the next thing she sees is from a car seat in the back, a little hand comes up like this and flips her off. You live what you learn. Matthew 5:16. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works give glory to your Father in heaven. Let them see that light. Dad, I need you to bless me. Number 7, I need you to bless me. This may be unconventional for you, but I want you to think about this. So much power in your tongue, right? James 3 talks about this. So much power in your tongue to wound or to bless. We have a Hurlbut family verse, and our kids know it. Proverbs 12:18. Reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. We have said that in our home over and over and over and over and over and over again. Reckless words pierce like a sword. Who hasn't said something that you wish you could bring back, right? But the tongue of the wise, oh, that'll bring healing, right? That'll bring healing. Marriage is like this, by the way, right? I mean, when I do premarital counseling with couples, I always tell them, you get married, you basically give each other a gun and a med kit. No one can wound you like your spouse because nobody knows your vulnerabilities like your spouse. She's got ammo on you, buddy. You've got it on her. But the opposite's true too. No one can heal you like your spouse because no one knows what you need quite the same way. It's true with your children, and they need you to speak over them. Old Testament shows us the power of this. You see in the Old Testament, I mean, why is it? You ever wonder why? When Esau comes to his father, Isaac, and he seeks this blessing that's already been given to Jacob, and you wonder, well, why doesn't Isaac just bless him? Why doesn't he just go, well, he kind of messed up. Now I'll speak this over you. Well, he speaks a sort of sideways blessing over Esau, kind of throws him a bone, but then there's kind of some negativity in it a little bit too. Because there was something in the Old Testament about the spoken word that mattered deeply. The whole structure is predicated on it. We saw it in our last session, right? The person who swears to his own hurt and doesn't change. The spoken word matters, and you mark people with it. The idea of sticks and stones and break my bones, but names will never hurt me, right? Who said that? No one, honestly, ever. Because you know that's not the case. Some of you in this very room walk in wounds of things that were spoken over you, right? We have to learn to bless. The power of the tongue. Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits. Proverbs 16:24. Gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. Proverbs 12:25. Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. Listen, life is hard. Life is hard. Your kids go to school, and some of them get verbally beat the living tar out of them in school by peers. They will go out in jobs, they will engage in life, and they will face verbal hardship against them. They need you to be a source of blessing. Back in session 4, we talked how a smart dad gives blessing verbally to his children. There were 3 statements. I love you, I'm proud of you, you're really good at, right? Even the Father speaks of the Son. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Bless your children. Dad, I need you to adjust your leadership style to me as I grow up. In your notes, I want to highlight this. From ages 1 to 13, you need to be your child's coach. From ages 13 to 18, you need to be your child's cheerleader. From ages 18 on, you need to be your child's consultant. I'll share a funny story and a weird story about this. Years ago, I was at a conference, and an older pastor got up to talk. It was evident that he was a pretty strict disciplinarian in his home. I can't speak to how much love he had in his home or didn't have. My assumption is that he had some good love in his home. I'm not sure he got this idea, though, about tweaking the leadership style to the appropriate context of your child. I can't relate to my 23-year-old the same way I relate to my 14-and-a-half-year-old, the same way that I related to any of them when they were 4. So this preacher began to share a story, and it was a true story, and my wife and I still laugh about it to this day. He told a story about his adult daughter who was married, and I believe she may have even had her own children at this point. But her conscience got the best of her, and she began to share and came home one time to visit her father, this pastor. And she shared about something she had done as a teenager that she had never told him before. She had broken trust. She had lied about it. She had deceived him. And she just felt overcome that she needed to confess to her dad. So he's sharing a story with us. So she shares what happened. And I quote, he said, when I heard her say that, I said, you come here. And she came over and he said, and I quote, I paddled that canoe. he spanked his adult daughter. And I thought, oh my word. My wife and I were like, what? I never heard of such a thing. Now that is not adjusting to a leadership style. You're not adjusting your leadership style. You need some adjustments if you're doing that stuff, right? As your kids age, you adjust, shift. See that? Coach. Here's what you got to do. Discipline, correction. When my basketball coach in high school said, get on the line, we got on the line. There wasn't one of us that said, no. Man, because we knew what would happen if we said no. It was going to be on like Donkey Kong. He was a coach, and we needed to do what he said. Now, he was for us. He wanted us to win. He'd celebrate the victory. He'd love on us. We had a great relationship. He'd throw the big party. It was wonderful. But he was a coach, and we respected him for it. A cheerleader, somebody that comes along and says, you are killing it. The world may not think so, but I see in you things they don't. And I'm going to speak life into those things. And I'm going to tell you what I see. Not just who you are, but what you can become. And don't you let anybody else tell you otherwise. And then a consultant where the welcome mat is out, but your mouth is shut. That's the hard one. The welcome mat's out, but your mouth is shut. Except when asked and about what is asked. That's hard. And that's a hard transition to make. But boy, every dad's got to make it. Or else he'll alienate his adult children in the process. Dad, I need to make some great memories with you. I need to make some great, fill up the family photo album. Your notes point out there's often a direct correlation between the memories we keep from childhood and the lives we live as adults. Let me encourage you. Do the small and the big. Do the small and the big. I'm going to be a little counterintuitive with you. I know that there are different philosophies of life that talk to you about the importance, and I believe in the importance of saving your money and being careful. But some of them kind of take some years that you would be able to have with your children and have you save, so you have a bunch in retirement. I hope you have a bunch in retirement, but let me encourage you. Take trips with your children. Build memories with your children. Live life with your children. Don't wait to be living down the road. Don't always be going to live. 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 Travel with them. Engage them. Next year I get to take my 14-year-old to Jordan. I can't wait to take her across the sea, just her and I. It's going to be a blast. I also can't wait to do the little stuff. So do the small stuff. If you have a daughter, I can speak to this. If there's one thing worse than musicals, it's shopping. Right? Shopping. Take them shopping. I mean, your eyes will glaze over. You're going to go into a comatose state after about 3 minutes of walking through one of these stores. But take them. They'll think it's wonderful just because you're present and they get to show you. And when you see the outfit, that's it. That's it. That's the one. If it's modest, of course. That's the one, right? Engage. Build memories with your sons. Get out in the wilderness. Get them out there. We live in a beautiful place. Take them on trips. Get them camping. Throw the ball with them. I can remember my dad literally poured hours into me as a child doing those very things. Finally, Dad, I need you to talk to me. I need you to talk to me about God and share His Word with me. How important is this, guys? If you are living a Christian life in front of your children, it's going to beg questions. It's going to beg questions. They need to see you. Live that out. Recently, my daughter saw me in public, and I walked back to a table, and she looked at me, she goes, "You're really kind." And I said, "What?" She said, "Well, you talk to people. You engage them. Like they like to talk to you, and you like to talk to them." I didn't think she was seeing a thing, right? But what I realized is she's always watching. Always looking, right? Always looking. I got to talk, and I got to set the Lord consciously in front of my family so that they know how to build their own lives. But Jesus called them to him, saying, let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of God. Here's a powerful text going back to the Old Testament about this. Deuteronomy 6, 5 through 9. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. Now listen, before you're allowed to talk, you have to be authentic. That means it's got to have gotten, the word of God has got to have gotten all over you first. Courageously follow God's word, right? That's what a real man does. Before he enters into bettering God's world. You won't know how to better it if you don't get God's best instructions, and they get around your life. You shall teach them diligently to your children, shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. You'll only talk about the Lord and his word if you love it, if it's around your heart. The intensity that you follow the Lord with adds power to your instruction when they see that you are following him. When you speak it, now they go, that's what it looks like. And you got to have a plan for teaching them. I love the practicality of that Old Testament text, right? And you know the Jews famously, right, took that and put phylacteries tied on their hands, little boxes, on their wrist, on their foreheads, little boxes. Mezuzah up on the side of the door that had scripture. They took this very literally. Here's the thing. Before we kind of poo-poo that and we get all abstract, well, that's not really, we're not going to walk around with boxes on our, I understand that. But do you have a plan? That's a plan. That's a tactile, practical plan. Do you have something? Or is it just, well, we got to try to figure it out? Well, when time permits. This year, we really want to get into the Word of God as a family. That's great. What are you going to do? Because you want to is going to die on January 3rd. Okay? Life happens. It's busy. You got to have a plan. Map it out. I want to illustrate how this works from a figure in church history. Jonathan Edwards made a conscious effort to spend at least 1 hour with his children every night. Very busy man, traveled all around on horseback, famous for pinning notes to the inside of his coat. He'd come home from a trip and he'd have all these notes pinned so he could, because he didn't, before you have an iPad or an iPhone you can take notes on, right? He's walking around and he's got all these notes pinned to him in the 1700s. He's a busy man, busy pastor, a scholar, a writer, speaker. But he has an written exchange with his daughter Esther, who is going through tremendous illness. And here's what he says, and then I want to read you what she wrote in reflection on her father. He said, you are like to spend the rest of your life, if you should get over this illness, at a great distance from your parents. But care not much for that. If you lived near us, yet our breath and yours would soon go forth, and we should return to our dust, whither we are all hastening. In other words, don't worry about being too far away from us. Life is short. Live your life. 'Tis of infinitely more importance to have the presence of an heavenly Father and to make process toward an heavenly home. Let us all take care that we may meet there at last. Edward's daughter reflects on time that she spent with her father, and here's what she wrote. Last eve I had some free discourse with my father on the great things that concern my best interest. I opened my difficulties to him very freely, and he as freely advised and directed. The conversation has removed some distressing doubts that discouraged me much in my Christian warfare. He gave me some excellent directions to be observed in secret that tend to keep the soul near to God, as well as to others, to be observed in such a more public way. And then she finishes with this. Are you kidding me? She finishes with this. What a mercy that I have such a father, such a guide. May all of our children say, what a mercy. What a mercy that I have such a father, that I have such a guide. Here are some final thoughts. Children are God's gift to us. They're God's gift to us. And we feel that gifting most in two wow moments. One, the day they're born, and then the day that they stand before us as mature and honorable adults. I'll give you one real recent illustration of this. My middle daughter has been through some real rough times lately, and she loves Jesus. There may be a child her age that loves Christ more. I've just personally never met them. She so loves the Lord. And we have watched her walk through difficulty and watched her virtue rise in ways that exceed our own virtue. And we just kind of step back and go, man, that is unbelievable. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for that. It's that moment where you see, okay, you're a woman now. You're a woman now. You have sons. You're a man now. Some of you have seen that in your children. You go, that's a man now. What an amazing moment that is. Children are our best long-term opportunity to better God's world. Our best long-term opportunity to better God's world. We looked at Psalm 127:3 briefly, but here is 3-5. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gates. Arrows in the hand of a warrior. Finally, children are ours to love and guide into becoming healthy, productive, God-glorifying adults. Such responsibility will humble the smart dad. He knows how inadequate he is for such a task. He knows that he needs God to succeed. And that reality is what drives him, to constantly call on God for his wisdom and for his help. In your notes is a prayer, and I want to read it for you, that General Douglas MacArthur prayed, called it a father's prayer. Build me a son, O Lord, who will be strong enough to know when he is weak, brave enough to face himself when he is afraid, one who will be proud and unbending in honest defeat and humble and gentle in victory. Build me a son, O Lord, whose wishes will not take the place of deeds, a son who will know thee, and that to know himself is the foundation stone of knowledge. Lead him, I pray, not in the path of ease and comfort, but under the stress and spur of difficulties and challenge. Here, let him learn and stand up in the storm. Here, let him learn compassion for those who fail. Build me a son whose heart will be clear, whose goals will be high, a son who will master himself before he seeks to master others, one who will reach into the future, yet never forget the past. And after all these things, add, I pray, enough of a sense of humor so that he may always be serious, yet never take himself too seriously. Give him humility so that he may always remember the simplicity of true greatness, the open mind of true wisdom, and the meekness of true strength. Then I, his father, will dare to whisper, I've not lived my life in vain. What a great seed to sow. In conclusion, men, a better man follows the best man, Jesus himself. He looks to him and courageously follows his word. He loves and protects God's woman. He excels at God's work, and he betters God's world. May God help all of us to be that, because that's the only way we can be it, is with God absolutely putting all the wind in our sails, and to him be the glory.